I love the nestedness of it. I think it's sort of, I suppose, I think it's sort of been built like a bowerbird builds a nest, and with little bits of collected things, some practical, and everything in it's recycled and natural. And there's little bits of paintings that are the coloured bright beauty bits, and then the chairs and the floorboards and the practical, and so it's like living in a little bowerbird's nest. The original cottage would have been built in the 19th century, and there are stories about it connected in with people who lived here then. So it feels, and the fireplaces, I think, are original. The house maintains a pretty even temperature. So in summer, I rarely have to use air conditioning. But also got really good airflows, plus the cellar where I can leave the door open and it draws, so that traditional way of drawing air up through the house. Then I have the doors and windows open upstairs. I mean, I open the house every day, all through the year, for at least an hour or two, and get the cross air moving through. So in summer it's a really cool house, and then in winter, look, it's not, it will be cool during the day, but then on the northerly aspect, like this room, get the sun in, the bay in the kitchen, and then at the front all afternoon, and then we've got the porches outside, so there's plenty of space to get the sun. And so even like the fireplaces, it's really interesting how it throws out great heat. It's got the big cast iron wheel things in it that collect the heat. So when the fire's burning, it is amazing how much heat, what area it will warm up. But I am in transition from gas to a reverse cycle air conditioner that will be for heating up the big space. But what I do is I just move from one little space to another so it's really mainly in here at night that I'll have the heater on, and that is perfectly fine on low for a few hours. When I'm by myself, I don't need to be in, and I don't want to be heating those big spaces, but I do want to be able to quickly heat them up when there's other people around, because there's nothing worse than a cold house. But I've also got a little study that gets a bit of morning sun and a little old heater in there, and I can sit in there. So I can move from one perfectly warm spot to another, and I only ever have one heater on at a time, or none, because I find that we get enough sun in Bendigo to sit outside I have my lunch outside in the sun and my cups of tea, and go out in the garden. So yeah. And so I've been here 30 years or so. So was excited about gardening, but knew very little about it. So didn't do a lot of the work preparing the soil, but planted a lot of things. So lots of trees. So got 30-year-old trees, and that's all great. But then I sort of moved away for a while and really lost contact with the garden quite a bit. And so just in recent times I've come back, and I had some friends visiting who were wandering around it with me, and they were going, oh my God, like it's so overgrown. And it was like this sort of light bulb moment for me, that moving onto an acre that had nothing, I'd spent all my gardening years trying to put things in, and if anything grew, encouraging it. And I'd never thought of pruning it all back. It was sort of almost shocking. But when I did it, it was amazing. So I had 5 hours of burning, huge amount. And I do a lot of pyrolysing. I did the burn really quickly, and I pyrolyse a lot of the wood and stuff to get the biochar to put back into the earth. So, but it was just amazing what a difference it made to do that clearing. So now replanting with Indigenous native plants, and particularly Indigenous local plants, and particularly looking at edible plants. So most of my gardening thoughts now are more about edible, useful than decorative, probably, yeah. But the other thing is, like the house, which was totally built with recycled furniture, and my garden is mainly made up of plants that have come from cuttings from other people or gifts from other people, and so many stories then attached to that. At the time, I had a book called The Natural House Book, still have it, I think, and very interested in that. So that was 91, and also had started on the mission of getting rid of plastic then. So the house is all built with natural materials, natural paints, and yeah, recycled wherever we could. And we do have some leather, but they were recycled from someone else, and but leather is still natural material. So these big trees were here, but all sort of like everything on the top there we've planted. At the back then is the back of it is bringing back to bush. So 91 we started collecting. We moved in 92, the end of 92. So it's nearly 30 years ago. A bay window, and there's a little bay, and then there's the library. And that's something, I mean, it's interesting because we weren't so energy conscious back then, like we had gas, put gas on, and I was a bit more of a romantic. And on this other side here, there was an apricot tree surrounded by an old rundown deck. And I wanted to keep that and keep that sort of air. So we rebuilt a deck around this apricot tree, which has now died. But in a way it works for Australia, because whilst we talk about the north because of winter, actually the more punishing thing in Australia is the summer. So it's beautiful. We've got the deck on the southerly side there that we sit in all summer, and I get the winter. So just for me or for a couple of people, the little porch there gets the early morning sun till about 11, and then in the afternoon it comes in the library and warms that room and the kitchen bay area, and of course got it then from about 11 on at the front. So we have so much good weather where you can sit outside, and so you get the afternoon sun on the front windows. Now interestingly, because you'll see I don't have the heater on, and I wouldn't have the heater on until tonight probably in the library. But the place is pretty warm. It's well insulated, all of it. We were really conscious of that. The roof and the walls are all insulated. Well, we started out with the plan of a humble pulling down the back, putting a little mud brick with a mezzanine roof with a bedroom upstairs. And we were we had about a year collecting materials, recycled materials. And one morning, my partner had rang and said, "Quick, can you get a truck?" Because he'd found this wood, and it was from an old corn store that was pulled down near the bowling alley in Bendigo. And because they weren't supposed to have pulled it down, they wanted to get rid of the wood quickly. So we got all this wood really cheaply, a huge amount of wood. I mean, there's a huge dining room table built out of it, and all the kitchen benches. But the main thing about the two-story was that we then had these very big posts that came as well. So they became the 4 posts of the house, which turned it into a two-story house.
It's hilarious. You could have cut them in half.
Oh, no. That was the inspiration. Obviously, that's not the only reason, but it led to that happening. And you can see that it was still like a mezzanine, but it just happens to end up being tall enough on the sides that they're actually rooms. They're not mezzanine. We've recycled a lot of that. So the doors up on the little balcony on my bedroom were the doors that were on the back of the old place. We pulled down, and there's lots of windows and things from a friend who pulled their back bungalow down, and we got all the recycled material. So there's stories attached to all the bits and pieces as well. The natural thing is huge. Well, that was the big thing for me, was the natural, like no plastics, no chemicals, so all biological paints. And inside with the floors, they're all wooden floors, old pine wood, and some of it was already in the front of the house. But we went and we got this load of pine flooring from out at Golden Square, Maiden Gully, I think it was. Anyway, the guy had had it for quite a few years, and we said to him, "Oh, where did it come from?" And he said, "Oh, came from the old convent they pulled down in Reserve Street in Eagle Hawk, which is just down the road." So that to me is sort of like when you're walking across this floor, not only the nuns, as someone who went to a Catholic school, had trodden on it for years, but the fact the wood came back, like it's a... So there's lots of stories like that. Yeah, there was a cottage here in the 19th century that got pulled down, and then the bungalow front thing was built bungalow style in the 1930s. So that's the bit that's still there at the front. And I'd say in the 60s or 70s they built the deck on the side there. My dad in the early 90s got a seed out of a Weet-Bix packet. In those days you'd get little free seeds and things, and he sprouted one and brought it round to me, a year or so later, just as a sapling in a pot, and I planted it, and so that's nearly 30 years ago. And yes, it is my favourite tree. So everything sort of had a little inspiration in something found, I suppose, or repurposed or given to us.